I never used to notice the sound of money. Back when Ryan and I were scraping rent from the bottom of a jar, money didn't have a sound, it had a silence. The kind that hangs in a grocery aisle when you count the prices on your fingers and pretend you like store-brand pasta more than the good kind. The kind that lives inside a bedroom where the heater clanks and stops clanking and you both lie still, wondering which bill you can pay late without getting a nasty letter. That was our music. Ryan whistled while he patched the chipped sink with whatever glue was on sale. I learned to fold fitted sheets so tight they looked like pride. We were a team. The cheap kind of team, the kind that trades time for everything. Time for meals from scratch, time for walking instead of fueling the car, time for mending instead of buying new. I told everyone love was enough, but loving inside scarcity can make even good people smaller. And smallness, I learned, has a way of begging to be fed. I met Adrian on a day when the city felt like a postcard I couldn't afford. I was heading home from my second shift at the cafe, shoes cutting into the back of my heel, trying to beat the rain. The hotel on the corner had a lobby like a cathedral, marble floors, a chandelier that looked like champagne frozen mid-burst, a smell like citrus and secrets. He stepped out of a revolving door like it had been invented for him, talking into a phone without looking at the steps. He would have run me over with his briefcase if he weren't so practiced at moving through the world without striking it. "Sorry," he said, steadying me, and when his hand closed around my elbow, I heard it, the sound of money. It's not coins clinking, it's a frequency. The quiet confidence that nothing important will break because if it does, there's someone paid to fix it before it matters. I mumbled it was fine. He noticed the cafe logo on my shirt and asked, "Is that the place on 6th? Best espresso in a city that lies about espresso." "You haven't tried ours," I said, which was a lie. I poured his kind coffee all day, but the joke landed. He smiled with his whole face. The street brightened a few lumens. "Adrian," he said, sticking out his hand like we were already in a room that required introductions. I gave him my name and started to step away. He tilted his head. "Let me buy you coffee, you don't have to serve." "I'm late," I said. Which was true. Late to the bus that would carry me to the part of town where trees grew from dirt instead of planters. Late to the kitchen where Ryan would be coaxing a burner to stay lit with a wooden spoon. Late to a life that felt like a sweater washed too many times. "Tomorrow?" he asked. That's another sound of money, tomorrow, spoken like it's guaranteed. I said yes. The cafe felt different with me on the other side of the counter. He was already there, reading something dense and expensive looking, glasses he probably didn't need perched on his nose. He stood when I arrived, which is the kind of courtesy that costs nothing and buys everything. "Your city is better than you think," he said, sliding a cappuccino across to me. "You just can't see it from the wrong angles." He asked about my life. Not the polite version, he mined for detail, nodded at the right places, laughed where a laugh would make the story feel like a win. He told me pieces of his incareful shapes, a firm with a floor high enough to see weather systems move, deals that required tiny planes, a schedule so tight it wore a watch on both wrists. He was funny with edges. He made it sound easy because people like him are born with an off switch for difficulty. When I mentioned Ryan, the small shift in his expression was almost imperceptible at cataloging. "What does he do?" "Whoever pays," I said, a little too defensively, because whoever pays feels like a confession if you say it next to a man whose shirts have opinions. He smiled like he forgave me for being poor, a practical man. He left a tip that felt like my whole afternoon, plus the part of the evening when I cut coupons. "Let me take you to dinner where the menus don't have decimals," he said. I laughed. It sounded like cheating. When I didn't say no, that sounded like cheating, too. I didn't tell Ryan about the dinner. I told him the evening shift ran late and the bus was slow. He said okay and asked if I wanted him to microwave a plate. He always asked. He never sulked. He kissed me on the forehead like a promise he planned to keep whether or not I helped. The restaurant had ceilings that held sound without letting it escape. Our table faced a skyline I'd only seen on postcards. The waiter said the word pairing so much it started to sound like a sacrament. Adrian ordered without asking, and somehow the food understood me better than I'd understood myself that week. He watched me taste things I couldn't pronounce, and there was something in his eyes that made me feel seen. That's a lie we love to swallow. Attention as affection, curiosity as care. He asked what I wanted from life, and I said a version of the truth: stability, travel, a little beauty that didn't feel borrowed. He asked what I feared, and I told a smaller truth, disappointment. The kind that accumulates like lint until you stop seeing your own fabric. I didn't tell the biggest truth, that I was starting to fear myself, the parts of me that lifted their heads at the sight of gloss and said mine. When he drove me home, the car didn't make a single noise it wasn't designed to make. He parked a block away because my street had opinions about cars like his. He walked me to our door. I should have said goodnight and slipped back into my real life like a sweater I'd promised to wear until it wore through. He leaned in. I let him. The kiss tasted like the idea of being allowed to stop worrying. I stood in the bathroom later, staring at the mouth that had two names on it. Ryan brushed his teeth behind me and made a heart in the fog on the mirror like we were still the couple who did things like that for jokes. I laughed because that's what the version of me in the mirror would have done. I love you, he said through toothpaste, and the sentence ricocheted off all the places in the room where promises go to hide. I love you too, I said. I meant it like a memory. If you want to make a terrible habit, the first ingredient is how easy it is to repeat. The second is how easy it is to explain to yourself. Adrian texted. He always texted at times of day when the world was tilted toward indulgence, late afternoon, late night, just after I'd finished a shift and the city smelled like bread, dinner again, lunch near your work, 5 minutes to see the sky from the right place. I said yes just often enough for my no to be a lie. The first time I slept with him, he told me I deserved more. That word deserve is a drug that tastes like permission. He said it like a blessing. I swallowed it like a cure. Afterward, he rested his head on my shoulder like we were already in the part of the story where your bodies know which way to lean. He asked nothing of me besides presence. That felt like mercy until I realized how much of myself I'd outsourced. I went home to a man who had warmed pasta and kept it from sticking, who had folded my apron into a square because he knew I liked to pretend we were neat, who had left the porch light on because the lock was stubborn. I told him work had been busy. He looked at my face the way doctors look at scans and chose to prescribe rest instead of calling the tumor what it was. He said, "We'll be okay," and I nodded, because it is astonishing how long a person can live inside. Two sentences that cancel each other out. When Ryan found out, it wasn't cinematic. No thrown plates, no neighbors listening through paper walls. Just the blue glow of my phone on a kitchen table. Adrian's name lighting up the screen like a flare. A message can't stop thinking about you that read like a verdict. Ryan stood there holding my future like it was a wet rag. He didn't yell. He asked questions in a voice that sounded like a person trying not to scare a bird. How long? Months, I said, and the word drew blood. Why? He wasn't crying yet. Wasn't I enough? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him enoughness was never the problem. That scarcity wraps itself around even good love until it starts to suffocate. I wanted to tell him I hated myself for the parts of me that loved. How the elevator in Adrian's building never stuttered between floors. I wanted to tell him I missed the sound of his key turning the lock a second time because the first time never took. Instead, I said the worst thing. Nothing. Because nothing is an answer, and it always answers wrong. He slept on the couch. I lay in our bed counting the cracks in the ceiling we had always meant to paint. In the morning, he was gone, and the note said, "I need time. Time is not a bandage. It's a mirror." I texted Adrian that Ryan knew. He told me to pack a bag. I did. I closed the door behind me like closing a book with a chapter torn out. Adrian's world fit like a costume to perfect, too clean, the seam allowance tight. The first weeks were a high-gloss montage, dinners that made your mouth feel smarter, trips where the sky seemed curated, clothing that turned my body into a proclamation. He said things like you don't have to worrying anymore, and I pretended worrying was a switch I could flip off because someone richer said so. I sent Ryan an email I rewrote 17 times and deleted 18. When I finally sent it, I told the truth the way you tell a story around a fire, choosing the parts that won't burn you. He didn't reply. He didn't owe me that gift. Forgiveness is not a product. You can't order it expedited. I wore the diamond bracelet Adrian gave me and hid underneath it the second-hand necklace Ryan had bought the year the alternator died. The scratch near the clasp clicked against the diamonds, like modesty knocking on a mansion door. Adrian was generous. He was also busy. His affection had timetables. He didn't like clutter, which in his life included most feelings. Don't make meaning where there should be efficiency. He said once when I asked him why he never framed photos. He meant it kindly. He meant it like coaching. It landed like a curtain dropped on a window I'd been staring through. At dinners, women asked where I'd summered, and I thought of the two fans we used to angle toward each other to make a cross breeze in July. Men asked what I did, and I said I was taking some time. which is what people say when they can afford to let their days evaporate into scented air. I learned the choreography of laughter that says I belong even when you don't. At home, I missed the stupidest parts of being broke. The way we timed the laundry so quarters lasted. The way Ryan tugged at a cabinet that stuck like he was coaxing a shy cat. The way our entire kitchen clicked into silence when the cheap kettle finally screamed. I started walking in the mornings to hear a city that didn't belong to portfolios. The street vendors cleaned their carts with a tenderness no one writes about. A woman unlocked a nail salon and hummed to him under her breath. A teenager in a coat too thin for the wind balanced 3 coffees without looking down. I wrote in a notebook because paper doesn't ask for a resume. On a Tuesday, I found our old block like a bruise. I'd forgotten. Mrs. Alvarez came out with her tiny dog and called me. Mia-like commandments can be reversed if you use the right nickname. She put rice and beans in my hands and told me to eat. I did, standing at Adrian's marble island, and the food turned the kitchen into a place where people might talk about their days without checking whether the plates matched. Come with me Thursday, Adrian said that night. Smile. It matters. What if I don't? I asked, gently. He kissed my hair. Then you'll make my life harder in rooms where hard is expensive. We went. Of course we went. That's another sound of money. The ghost of course haunting every plan. Halfway through the salmon, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I got your email. The message read, "You don't need my absolution, but I hope you find a way to be proud of yourself again." I put the phone face down and stared at my reflection in the spoon. The chandelier made me look like a person with a crown she hadn't earned. Everything okay? Adrian murmured. Yes, I lied. He smiled, satisfied with the performance note, not the performance. On the drive home, I decided to leave. It wasn't dramatic. Decisions rarely are, when they're true. They arrive like a room whose lights finally turn on. I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while, I said. He didn't argue. Power rarely begs. He just set 2 tumblers on the bar and poured something old into one. You'll be back, he said. Not like a threat. Like physics. I packed in the morning. I left the envelope of money he'd placed by the door because some debts don't clear with cash. I took the necklace with the scratch and the notebook with the crooked spine and went to a short-term rental, where the pipes had opinions and the windows didn't seal right. The first night, I slept like a person who had stopped pretending she wasn't awake. I brewed coffee in a saucepan. I burned my tongue. I laughed. I cried. I called the community center and asked if they needed help. They said Tuesdays, and I said yes before they finished the sentence. I wrote names and donated books and told a girl with braids that a library is a treasure map, where X marks any page you love. A week later, I ran into Ryan hauling 2 boxes of tools through the center side door. They finally hired me, he said, shrugging like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was exactly the kind of something he'd always done, fixing what didn't belong to him, because someone had to. I got your text, I said, which was a lie. I had memorized it. Thank you. You don't need my forgiveness, he said. But I gave it to you so I could stop carrying you around in every room. Are you happy? I asked, because I am selfish enough to want the answer to heal me too. I'm alive, he said. Happy's a day-to-day verb. We stood there in the cinder block hallway that smelled like bleach and crayons. I wanted to ask him if he missed the kettle that screamed. I wanted to tell him I still wore his necklace under the diamond like a confession. I wanted to say I was sorry in a way that would turn back time. Instead, I said, take care of yourself, because mercy is a language I'm trying to learn late. You too, he said, and went inside to fix a hinge that would squeak again next week because that's how real things behave. I walked home and wrote 1 sentence I didn't delete. I left a good man for the sound of money and found out it's just silence wearing jewelry. And for the first time in months, the room answered back. I used to think regret was a feeling. It's not. It's a routine. In the little sublette with the opinionated pipes, regret woke up with me, followed me to the mirror, sat on the rim of the sink while I brushed my teeth, and asked the same question every morning. Now what? I made a list on a sticky note and taped it to the cupboard like a commandment. 1. Find steady work. 2. Stop checking his socials. 3. Learn to sit in silence without asking it to be anything else. 4. Don't text Adrian. Number 4 was the hardest on days that looked like the inside of a pocket lenti, shapeless, small. I got hired at a bakery 2 bus lines away. It paid less than the cafe, but the ovens exhaled warmth like forgiveness, and the owner, Margot, swore at dough in a way that made swearing feel like love. I opened at 5. At 6, the first customers came in with sleep still folded into their faces. At 7, Children pressed noses to the glass and argued with quarters. At 8, the city remembered itself. I learned the names of regulars and the stories attached to their pastries. My wife is in labor, so this croissant is my courage. My boss thinks this box means I stayed late. Today is the anniversary of something no one else remembers. I liked being useful in a way that didn't require me to pretend. On Tuesdays, I walked to the community center after my shift, flour in my hair like confetti that had forgotten the party. The kids there didn't care that I'd once worn a dress that required a valet to help me sit down. They cared that I remembered who liked dinosaurs and who liked dogs, who preferred glitter and who preferred quiet, who needed a sticker on their shirt to face the rest of the day. I started sleeping through the night again. Adrian texted 2 weeks after I left. Dinner, just to talk. I stared at the screen long enough to feel the old tilt of the world the way his invitations came disguised as mercy. I typed no, then deleted it and typed not a good idea, then deleted that and finally put the phone in a drawer like a bad habit I was trying to outlive. He sent flowers the next day. White lila, the kind that claimed the air like a sermon. There was no card. The smell made the apartment feel like an expensive apology. I carried them down the hall and set them on the windowsill by the stairs. A neighbor in slippers shuffled past and said, "Someone must love you. Someone must love themselves," I said, and we laughed like accomplices. He switched tactics. "I can help," he wrote, as if help were a rope and not a leash. "There's no prize for doing this the hard way." I wrote back one sentence that surprised me with its steadiness. "The prize is knowing who I am when no one's paying for it." He didn't reply. Power hates a full stop it didn't place. Ryan and I filed the divorce papers in a beige office where lives come to be dismantled quietly. The clerk wore kindness like armor, efficient and soft. We sat side by side in plastic chairs that squeaked when you breathed. He had a new jacket, cheap, but it suited him. I couldn't decide whether to be glad or pierced. When they called our names, we stood like people about to board a flight to different countries. The forms were lines and boxes and words that used to be wholly reduced to categories, irreconcilable differences, separate residences, no children. We initialed and signed and dated a past tense. On the last page, he paused. "Are you okay?" He asked, not looking up. "Learning," I said. It wasn't an answer, but it was honest. Outside, the air felt indecently normal. We stood on the steps, the city refusing to mark our end with anything more dramatic than a bus breaking. He handed me a small envelope without meeting my eyes. Inside was a key, the spare to the apartment we'd shared. He had labeled an old door in his careful print. "Figured you might want to keep it for," he stopped. "Foreclosure," he finished, and we both smiled at the absurdity, because keys don't close anything. They only open. "Thank you," I said, which covered nothing and everything. We hugged like people who'd learned how to let go without tearing. He walked left, I walked right, and for the first time since I'd stepped into Adrian's lobby, my feet felt like they belonged to me. Margot noticed the day I stopped flinching when the register jammed. "You're getting your shoulders back," she said, sliding a tray of morning buns into the oven. "My what?" "The part of you that doesn't ask permission to exist." I laughed. "Is that a pastry?" "It is today." She dusted flour off her hands and squinted at me. "You going to school?" "Always wanted to ask." "You have a way of looking at things like there's a syllabus." "Used to dream about it," I said. "Then life." She nodded. "Life is a lousy guidance counselor. Start small. A class, one night a week. You don't have to fix the whole map to take a road." I went home and looked up community college schedules. Intro to Creative Nonfiction stared back like a dare. I registered before I could talk myself out of it. The confirmation email felt like a hand on my back, gentle, insistent. "Go on." The first night, the classroom smelled like whiteboard cleaner and late decisions. 12 of us circled a limp plant and a professor who wore cardigans like encouragement. We wrote for 10 minutes about our names. I wrote Emily means industrious, which I used to think was an insult until I learned what it feels like to be kept. I read it out loud. No one clapped. They nodded. It felt better than applause. It felt like being seen without being purchased. On my way home, I passed the hotel where I'd met Adrian and didn't look inside. The revolving door spun without me. One afternoon, the bakery's sink coughed and died mid-rinse. Margot looked at it like a rebellion. "I'll call a guy," she said, already scrolling. "Let me try," I said. I used to live with a man who could talk a pipe into behaving. Ryan had kept a plastic bin under our kitchen sink filled with washers. Tape, things with names I had never learned. He'd fix things after midnight and hum like a mechanic soothing a storm. I missed the sound of competence more than I missed the things it saved. I turned off the water and took the tap apart. It felt like reciting a poem I thought I'd forgotten. 10 minutes later, the faucet cleared its throat and returned to work. The sound made Margot clap like a child. "You magician," she said. "Free croissant for the plumber." I ate it standing up, butter flaking down my shirt like soft confetti, and thought about how love sometimes looks like this, knowing enough about a thing to restore the part of it that wants to function. That night I wrote Ryan a note I didn't send. "Today I fixed a tap with your hands." Temptation doesn't disappear when you choose a different life. It gets smarter. Adrian bumped into me outside the community center like a coincidence, wearing cologne. He had on the same unbothered smile that once opened doors for me that didn't have my name on them. "You look good," he said, and I felt years of conditioning reach for a mirror. "Thanks." I shifted my tote bag higher, the one with stickers from kids who thought adults were blank space that needed decoration. "How did you know I was here?" "I didn't," he said, which could have been true. In his world, streets were small and people circulated like currency. He looked at the building, the scuffed steps, the bulletin board held together with hope and staples. Still doing charity. The word sat wrong in his mouth, like he'd tried to pronounce a language he didn't need to learn. "It's not charity," I said evenly. "It's community." He nodded as if I'd made a branding correction. "Have dinner with me," he said, skipping pretense. "The way you skip a stone because you're sure it knows how to fly." "No, Emily," he said, softening. "Don't punish yourself because you wanted something better." "I'm not. I meant it. I'm choosing a better that doesn't make me smaller." He smiled like I'd told a joke with a complicated setup. "You'll get tired of the hard way," he said. "Everyone does." "Maybe," I said, "but I'd rather be tired and honest than rested and rented." He laughed, shook his head, and stepped back into the stream of people who move through cities, certain the current belongs to them. I watched him go and felt both lighter and sadder than I expected. That's the thing about endings. The cleanest ones still leave fingerprints. Ryan started dating. I learned this the way everyone learns everything now, accidentally. Through screens. A photo, his hand around a coffee cup. Another hand with chipped blue polish around the same cup. I zoomed in like a detective and then closed the app. Because pain doesn't get smaller when you magnify it. 2 weeks later, I saw them at the farmer's market. A place where sincerity goes to buy tomatoes. She was shorter than me, older, with laugh lines that looked like they'd earned benefits. They were arguing kindly about peaches. I ducked behind a stack of kale. I had no intention of buying and felt ridiculous and human in equal measure. He saw me anyway. Of course he did. You don't share a life without learning each other's gravity. He raised a hand. I stepped out from my leafy shield. "This is Nora," he said. And I liked her immediately because she didn't try to make the introduction easy. She looked me in the eye the way people do when they've chosen to live without costumes. "Hi," she said. Nothing extra. No performance. Just hello, which is the bravest word when it's honest. "Hi," I said back, and meant it. We all stood there among peaches pretending to understand how three people can occupy the same old story without ruining the ending. Then Ryan said, "We should," and gestured in opposite directions. "Yeah," I said. "Have a good day." We did. All three of us. The world didn't collapse. Sometimes mercy looks like not pushing on a bruise. In class, I wrote an essay titled "What Money Sounds Like." I didn't name Adrian or Ryan. I wrote about the frequency of confidence, the pitch of a kettle that finally screams, the tone of apologies that come with receipts, the hush in a courtroom that isn't a courtroom when two people sign paperwork that once would have been a vow. I read it out loud and the room was quiet in a way that meant listening. Afterward, the professor said, "Endings are where we see who a narrator has become." She smiled. "Who are you now?" "I'm someone who knows how to fix a sink," I said. The room laughed. "And someone who knows how to say no to a very nice restaurant, and I'm someone who can sit alone in a quiet apartment without mistaking silence for punishment." She nodded like I'd solved a problem that couldn't be shown on the board. "That's voice," she said. "Keep it." I walked home under a sky that looked rented but wasn't, and for the first time since I left, I felt the outline of a future that didn't require me to trade myself for amenities. Months move the way they do when you stop demanding they amaze you. Work, class, Tuesdays. I bought a kettle. It screamed the first time like an old friend who hadn't forgiven me yet. I laughed and patted its chrome like an apology. Margot gave me a raise I hadn't asked for and a title I didn't know bakeries needed. Morning lead. It came with a key and the right to unlock the door while it was still dark. The bell above the frame made a sound that felt like permission. I slid trays into heat and thought about all the ways we feed each other without bragging. The community center asked if I would run a Saturday writing club for kids who like words but don't trust them yet. I said yes, because yes is a muscle and mine was getting stronger. We stapled zines and mailed them to grandmas and taped them to the wall like trophies. A boy who only drew cars wrote a paragraph about his mom's hands and then stared at it like it had shown him a secret path through the room. A girl who wrote her name like a headline made me promise to read her story to anyone who would listen. I did. Tuesdays grew into Saturdays. My life arranged itself around usefulness like a flower around sun. Ryan dropped off a box at the bakery one morning, a collection of things I'd left tangled in the back of a closet. He waited until after the rush, bought a cinnamon roll, and leaned against the counter like a person who knew how to occupy his own bones. "How's class?" he asked. "Hard," I said. "Good. Nora says hi," he offered, and it wasn't cruel. It was citizen talk between two people who had once tried to be a country. "Tell her hi back," I said. "She has excellent peach judgment." He laughed. The sound landed in me like a small, warm animal and then ran off to live somewhere it wouldn't get trapped. He nodded at the line forming and raised the cinnamon roll in salute. "You're doing okay," he said. Not a question. "I am," I said, and was surprised by the absence of wobble. He left. I watched him go with something like gratitude and something like grief and something that wasn't quite either, a third thing I didn't have a word for yet. Maybe it was closure, but quieter. Maybe it was just the end, behaving. Adrian texted on my birthday because of course he did. People like him always remember the dates that make their gestures look like fate. Dinner, no strings. The phrase no strings came with a memory of silk that had felt like rope. I typed, "Thank you, but no." Then, because truth is a habit worth practicing, I added, "I hope you're well." It cost me nothing and promised nothing. He responded with a confetti emoji and a champagne bottle and, "Doors always open." The door is always open when you're the one who owns the building. I turned off my phone and had cake with Margot and the Tuesday kids on a Saturday. They sang off-key and loud. I cried when the littlest one handed me a crumpled drawing of a stick figure holding a loaf of bread that was 2 times her size. "It's you," she said. "You give people warmth." That night, I walked home slowly, counted lit windows, and let myself imagine a life both smaller and larger than the one I had once chosen, the kind of life where money has a sound, sure, but it isn't the loudest thing in the room. People ask for a lesson when you confess. They want a fortune cookie at the end of your ruin. Here's mine, written in crumbs on a bakery counter I wipe clean every morning. I left a good man because another man's world was shinier, and I thought shine meant safety. I learned that luxury is a language that can make you fluent in someone else's priorities. I learned that the quiet you buy is not the same as the quiet you earn. I learned that guilt doesn't go away when you change your sheets, it goes away when you change your habits. I learned how to fix a tap, run a morning, and sit with myself while water boils. And if you're asking whether I do it differently, yes. Not because being poor is noble or being rich is evil, but because love is work and I stopped applying. If I had told Ryan I was drowning instead of looking for a raft with better upholstery, maybe we would have built a boat. Maybe we would have split anyway, with less wreckage. I'll never know. My punishment is living with the unknowable. My mercy is living, period. If you've read this far, tell me, if you were the person I betrayed, if someone chose money over you and then came back with a different kind of hunger, would you open the door? Or would you leave their key where it belongs? On a hook labeled old door. The winter I learned how to be alone, the pipes finally stopped complaining. Maybe they got used to me, or maybe I learned to hear their rhythm as something other than threat. I'd wake before the alarm, listen to the apartment clear its throat, and feel the kind of calm that doesn't brag, just arrives, sets down a mug, and waits for you to notice. On a Tuesday, the community center's boiler died. The building went cold as a secret, and the kids showed up wearing coats over hoodies, fingers tucked into sleeves. Mrs. Alvarez called it character building weather, which is what adults say when the budget can't stretch. "We'll cancel after school until the repair," the director sighed, flipping through a binder full of numbers that refused to mean yes. "Don't," I said before my brain caught up to my mouth. "Move the tables to the gym. We'll write in our hats." The kids cheered. No one cheers for math like that. I texted Margot to ask if we could donate the day-old loaves. She sent 3 boxes and a message. Bring back my sheet pans or I will haunt your grandchildren. We ate bread and cold apples and wrote stories about dragons who breathed steam because fire felt rude in a gym. When I went home, I stood in front of my kettle like it was an altar and thanked it out loud for boiling. 2 days later, I got an email from the center's director with the subject line emergency appeal. The boiler repair had a number attached that made my stomach flip. They'd cut programs if they couldn't find the money first Tuesdays, then art, then the snacks that made homework look less impossible. I forwarded the email to everyone in my tiny, newly rebuilt orbit. The class group chat, the bakery regulars with hearts stitched to their sleeves. My mother, who thinks email is a conspiracy but will still call 3 people because she likes the sound of urgency when it serves a good meal. Then I shut my laptop and cried hard enough that my shoulders ached. It felt like losing a future one radiator at a time. The next morning, there was an envelope under my door. No name. Inside, cash, small bills, clipped together with a paper heart a kid might have cut. The note said, "For heat, from someone who has been cold." I sat on the floor and sobbed again, this time in the language of gratitude. We were halfway to the goal by the weekend, tiny donations stacking like bricks. Margot set out a tip jar labeled boiler, not Beyoncé, and people laughed and filled it anyway. The professor from my writing class brought a stack of used books and told customers to pay what felt right. A woman I'd never met handed me $20 and whispered, "For the girl who waits at the bus stop at my corner and never wears gloves." The city messy, loud, unromantic put its hand on our backs and said go on. And then Adrian called, not texted, called. The old frequency moved through the room like a remembered perfume. I let it ring once longer than dignity, then answered. "Hi," he said, warm as a lobby, saw the fundraiser link in a mutual story. Of course he had. "You're still doing that community thing?" he asked, a little laugh tucked into the vowel of community. "Still," I said. "How much do you need?" I told him the number, added the part about cutting programs, swallowed the part about kids riding in hats while their breath fogged the air like cartoon bubbles. He whistled softly. "I can stroke a check today," he said. "No more begging for pennies, no more jars on counters, heat by Friday." I closed my eyes. I could see it so easily, the email blast with goal met. In a font that looked like confetti, the director crying in the gym. Kids peeling off coats and throwing them into corners like victory flags. I could also see Adrian at a table in a warmed room, smiling with that exact ratio of modesty and pride rich people wear when their name goes on a plaque. "What would you want in return?" I asked, and I hated that I already knew the answer. Nothing is free in the language he speaks, even generosity expects grammar. "Nothing," he said immediately, which sounded like a person trying on a word that fits poorly. Then, lighter, maybe a little naming, Adrian Wells' community boiler has a ring. I laughed, because humor helps people do the thing they were going to do anyway. "A plaque isn't a leash," I said carefully. He softened. "Emily, I'm offering help." "You're offering ownership," I said, not unkindly. "And a chance to prove your story about me was right." Silence. Then, "Which story is that?" "That I'd get tired of the hard way." He didn't deny it. Heat matters more than pride. "I agree," I said. "That's why I'm calling everyone who doesn't need their name on the radiator." He exhaled. "You're being exhausting on principle." "Probably," I said, "but I sleep better now." He made a sound like a smile that lost faith halfway through. "Call me if you change your mind." I didn't. 2 days later, the goal meter on the website filled, not with one check but with hundreds of small rectangles. The director cried in the gym. The kids kept their coats on while the pipes clanged awake, then threw them off with a cheer that shook the banners. Someone taped a paper plaque above the boiler, warmed by everyone. I sent Adrian a one-line text. "We did it." He heart-reacted and wrote, "Of course you did." It was both blessing and dismissive pat. I let it be both. That's the thing about moving on. You don't have to edit other people's versions anymore. Spring pushed its shoulder against winter, and the city let itself be convinced. The bakery switched from cinnamon to lemon. The kids wrote about rain like it was a character. I slept with the window cracked and let the sirens and laughter climb into bed with me. Loneliness returned sometimes, but it didn't bring its suitcase. It just asked for water, drank it, and left. In class, I turned my boiler essay into a longer piece. The professor suggested submitting it to a small journal that published voices that smell like bread. I laughed and did it. 2 weeks later, an email. We'd love to run your piece. I sat on the stoop and read the sentence 12 times like it was a parable. It didn't pay. It didn't need to. Seeing my words wearing their own clothes in public made my skin fit better. Put the link on the bakery chalkboard, Margot said. Tell people their croissant lady is famous. I wrote Emily got published. In the sort of handwriting that couldn't decide between pride and panic. Regula's fist bumped me over brioche. A teenager asked, "Can I be you?" And I said, "Be you," but louder. Ryan came in the next day and pointed at the board. "Look at you," he said. And the sentence didn't carry any weight it didn't need. He bought 2 loaves, one for the center, one for a woman I didn't know who, he said. Makes soup like therapy. How's Nora? I asked, carefully. She's good, he said. She laughs at my bad jokes. You always did have a surprisingly deep catalog. He grinned. Yeah. He tapped the counter. Proud of you, he added, too casual to be anything but deliberate. Thank you, I said, and the quiet after was the kind that plants like. He left with the bread, and I watched him go without ripping a seam inside. Love doesn't always die, sometimes it changes jobs. Ours had become something like weather present, shaping, but no longer asking permission to fall. Temptation came back one more time, loud and dressed for a finale. Adrian texted at 11:47 p.m., I'm downstairs. No warning. No question mark. I stared at the message long enough for my kettle to boil and then go quiet again. I put on a sweater and went down because curiosity is a muscle, too, and mine refuses to atrophy. He was leaning against his car like an advertisement apologizing for being effective. Streetlights loved him, they always had. He looked me over the way you look at a house you used to own and catch yourself reaching for keys you no longer carry. Walk, he asked. We did, under a moon smug enough to glow even in the city. He told me about a deal that had almost killed him, money that nearly grew teeth and bit. I told him about the Tuesday kids and the boy who wrote his way past anger for the first time. He smiled when I laughed and didn't when I didn't. He'd always been good at mirroring. That's why people like him collect rooms. At the corner, he stopped. Come back, he said, not bothering with poetry. I miss you. You miss how I looked next to your life, I said gently. He shook his head. That's not fair. I know, I said. Neither was leaving Ryan the way I did. I'm trying to be better at fair. He shoved his hands in his coat pockets like a boy. I can make you safe. I'm safe, I said, and the words stood up straight. I'm broke and safe and busy and safe and alone and safe. He inhaled. You think I'm the villain. You're a man who thinks comfort is a synonym for love, I said. I was a woman who believed you. He looked at me like he wanted to argue and couldn't find a clean surface to place the first sentence. You'll regret this, he said finally, but softly, like a prayer for the version of me he understood. I already regret enough, I said. I'm building something I don't have to pay back. We stood there listening to a city that had decided to be spring. He nodded once, the kind of nod you give a deal that won't close. Then he got in the car and left at the speed of a choice. I went upstairs and made tea and didn't cry. The room felt like someone had returned from a long trip and wasn't tired. Summer arrived like a lesson I'd been waiting to understand. The center held a reading for the Tuesday writing club. We dragged chairs into a circle and made lemonade with too much sugar and not enough lemons and called it sweet on purpose. Parents came, neighbors came. Margot came in an apron dusted with flour like a flag. The kids read into a microphone that screeched at first and then learned its manners. A boy stood on a milk crate and read about fixing a bike with his uncle and cried on the last sentence. The kind of cry that cleans. A girl who never wore her hair the same way twice read a poem about radiator. Hiss that made a grown man in the back wipe his eyes with the heel of his hand. I read last. This is called What Money Sounds Like, I said. And the room leaned forward like a person with good posture. I read about kettles and lobbies and paper plaques and people who warm buildings with $10 bills. I read about choosing the hard way, because it's the only one that leaves you bigger than you started. I read about a good man who fixed things that weren't his and a rich man who offered rooms with no place to sleep. I read about a woman who wanted to stop counting coins so badly she forgot to count the ways. Love shows up with dirty hands. When I finished, the room didn't clap right away. It breathed. Then it made a sound I will carry longer than any chandeliered cheer, a small, honest thunder of hands that smelled like dough, ink, and radiator dust. After, in the baking heat of the parking lot, Ryan came up with Nora. She hugged me first, quick and real. You wrote us all, she said. even the parts that hurt. I'm sorry, I blurted, because some apologies take the scenic route. Nora squeezed my arm. We're okay, she said. And I believed her because her voice had the same temperature as the evening. Ryan held out a little box the size of a trick. Found this in a drawer, he said. Inside was the kettle we'd bought at a yard sale, the one that had screeched like a train. He'd polished it until it looked like memory with a shine. You always liked that stupid whistle, he said. I still do, I said, throat tight. We stood there a beat too long and then exactly long enough. Take care of yourself, he said, and I laughed because it had become our pledge. You too, I said. They walked away, easy in their togetherness, and I felt something close that didn't slam. This is not the part where I tell you I became saintly, or rich, or someone who never wants what glitters. I still want. I just want differently. I want noise I can afford to love. Boot scrapes on a bakery floor, radiator hiss. The laughter of kids who learned at a microphone is just a friendly megaphone. The scream of a stupid kettle that kept showing up. If you're here for a warning, here it is. The sound of money is addictive. It makes you think your edges are doors. It can soften you where you should be sturdy and harden you where you should be soft. If you choose it over the people who hold your name like a careful thing, you won't notice the silence until it's wearing everything you own. If you're here for hope, you can leave a room that flatters you and find a smaller one that forgives you. You can be the person who fixes sinks and runs mornings and writes about kettles. You can count what counts and let the rest be numbers. And if you're here for a question because every confession needs a hook at the end, tell me this. If someone you loved chose shine over you and came back later with calloused hands and a story that sounded like work, would you trust the new noise? Or would you keep their key on a hook forever labeled old door?
Crazy, right? Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.